Free and Rowdy Party was a party that really was less about law and order. They were more inclined and supportive of things like gambling and prostitution and crime in some ways too. So they were very much aptly named. And their first candidate for mayor in 1848 was Moses Formwald. On the other side, you had the Moral and Reform Party, which hints at the differences already between the two. They were much more about law and order and also temperance, really quelling the presence of saloons. And one thing I will mention, at this time in 1848, in Atlanta, there were only 3 churches, but there were 40 saloons. And with the population estimated at 2,500, that's about 1 saloon for every 62 individuals, residents living in Atlanta, including children. So you kind of had a sense, again, of the kind of frontier life that was represented in these early years of Atlanta and this first election of Atlanta. And the candidate for the Moral and Reform Party was Jonathan Norcross, born in Maine, the son of a minister, a very kind of pious person who came to Atlanta and later became he was both the sawmill owner and later the owner of a dry goods store. And he was really very much in line with what the Moral Party was about. So yes, very different kinds of approaches here. There were different ideas about where he was born, Germany, elsewhere. But the one thing we do know for certain is that in 1844, Moses Formwald moved from Knoxville, Tennessee to Decatur, Georgia. And he set up a partnership with John Adams in Decatur in a kind of tinware shop. In 1846, that business partnership dissolved, and Formwald moved to Atlanta. He set up another tin and copper business on Decatur Street, and his prime product, his most popular product, was a copper still for making liquor. So that gives you a kind of sense of where he was. In addition, he opened one of the first saloons in Atlanta, on Murrells Row, and that's one of those notorious areas of Atlanta at that time, named for a famous Tennessee murderer. And it was very much a place where, well into the 20th century, you had things like cockfighting, other illegal activities. It was a red light district. It was a place that drew criminals really from all over the South. So it was one of those areas very much that was known for its being a kind of den of iniquity, as they call it, I think. So that was one of the focuses for the Moral Party. They wanted to get rid of that, and they wanted to get rid of 2 other, in particular, kind of notorious areas in the early city. And one of them was a place called Slabtown. And Slabtown was a kind of early slum on the edge of the city. And that was where Jonathan Norcross came and later to set up his sawmill. Jonathan Norcross ran that sawmill, and his main customer was the New Georgia Railroad. The sawmill created the railroad ties, and then, like you said, all of the materials that were left over, he allowed the impoverished mill workers to take and make use of. And that's really what they did build Slabtown from, was largely the refuse from that sawmill. After about a year at that sawmill, Jonathan Norcross moved on to other things, eventually setting up a dry goods store. And he became very much associated at the same time. This would have been when Atlanta was known as Marthasville, but he came associated with a group that was trying to change the name to make it more elegant, which finally came up with the term Atlanta. And he also became very much involved in the Morrill party's plans for what this new city should be like. No, Moses Formwalt, the member of the Free and Rowdy Party, a leader of the Free and Rowdy Party, was the winner. That part was not contested, but the election itself was not without disturbances. I believe there were reported over 60 fights within the city during that campaign. So it was kind of a contentious thing because there was many things at stake. And for the Free and Rowdy Party, many of them were owners of distilleries and brothels and gambling houses. So there was a lot at stake with this Morrill party that was wanting to come in and either control or get rid of those things. So that was really what the focus of it was at this time. So at this time, and in addition to what I was talking about, well, there were a lot of issues that the Morrill party wanted to take care of. And that was the rowdiness, that was problems in the streets with deadly crossings, all kinds of things. There are potholes that people literally fell in and died, some of uncovered wells in the street, etc. There were all kinds of accidents at railroad crossings. So there was a lot that needed to be dealt with, but there were two different visions of how that would happen. And of course, we mentioned that Formwalt was so Formwalt and Norcross became the kind of focal points for this. But another interesting thing about the election was not only Moses Formwalt's victory, but also the fact at that time that the mayors only served a one term in office. He actually had a really large impact for his short term in office. And because, again, as I mentioned earlier, he was, as part of the Morrill party, his platform when he got in office, he promised to collect taxes, enforce city laws on cockfighting, the discharging of firearms, and prostitution. And he served not only as mayor, but also as a road supervisor and a judge for the police court. Now, the thing that now, when Norcross won, the Rowdy Party, even though it was no longer in office, didn't go away without a fight. And that's probably the best way actually to describe it, because Mayor Norcross faced very stiff resistance from the Rowdies. And his first court case, he was the judge of the police court. And in his first court case, the defendant, who was found guilty of street fighting, after the sentence was announced and he is fined, he brandished a knife and threatened to butcher everybody in the courtroom. And it's reported that Jonathan Norcross picked up his chair and held it like a kind of like a lion tamer, and there was all this chaos. And the defendant escaped. And then the next night, the Rowdy Party hauled the Decatur's cannon, which I think may still be the one that you see on their court square. It was a relic from the War of 1812. And they used it in Decatur to inspire, things for celebrations. But the Rowdy Party went there, grabbed the cannon, brought it to the city in the street, and put it right in front of Jonathan Norcross's dry goods store. They fired not ammunition at that point. I think it was sand and gravel, but they left a note saying, "Resign, or the next time it'll be more serious." So you can get a sense of what he faced, but they weren't deterred. The Morrill Party wasn't deterred for several weeks. The police arrested residents of Snake Nation, which was a notorious settlement of log cabins and wood huts along Whitehall Road, now Peter Street. And the rowdy leaders and the party leaders and the police filled the city's new jail. In fact, they filled it to capacity, and they had to start giving people house arrest. So it was building and building. And then late one night, the Morrill Party leaders, this is so fascinating for me, all that this is going on, again, the kind of Wild West Atlanta. For several weeks, the police arrested residents of Snake Nation and the Rowdy Party, and as I said, and filled the jail to capacity. But then late one night, the Morrill Party and deputized supporters who were known as white caps because they wore white hoods, reminiscent of Ku Klux Klan, I guess, to disguise their identity. And they swept into Snake Nation. They went into the bars. They whipped the men that they found there. They took the women and put them in wagons and took them in, and dropped them off in Decatur. And then what I would call the Morrill mob made its way into Snake Nation and later Slabtown, and they burned many of the buildings, including those buildings that were built with Jonathan Norcross's scrap lumber in Slabtown. After his term in office, he continued his work as a tin and copper salesperson, but he also became a deputy sheriff of DeKalb County, I believe in 1852. And that was a short-lived career. And later in that same year, he was escorting a prisoner to the courthouse when the prisoner pulled out a knife and stabbed him to death. So that was the end of Moses Formwalt, and he was actually buried in Oakland Cemetery, which I didn't mention earlier, but that was one of the real kind of important developments for Atlanta as a city in 1850. Oakland Cemetery, like cemeteries elsewhere in the US, became the first kind of like urban parks. They were not only, places where the dead were honored, but also where families and full families, children, adults would come and enjoy the beautiful surroundings. A lot of this was the impact of Olmsted, who had a huge impact on Atlanta as well. Yeah, I think that we can see in this that there was and what I wanted to say after that is initially Formwalt was buried in an unmarked grave in Oakland Cemetery. And I think both of our candidates here are of course, buried in Oakland Cemetery for about 60 years. But then there was an effort in the early 20th century to honor Atlanta's first mayor. So in 1916, I believe it was, the mayor Woodward at that point presided over an unveiling of a monument in Oakland Cemetery to Moses Formwalt. And then, of course, as well, there's a street named in his honor in Southwest Atlanta in Mechanicsville. So despite the fact that we know relatively very little about Atlanta's first mayor, he is still he's memorialized in two different ways in the city.